Welcome to the last event of day 2 of the ASX Symposium. So up next, we have an awesome astrophotography talk by Katerina Benevides. A bit about them. Katerina Isabel Benevides is a second-year Astrophysics Specialist, Archeology Major, and Math Minor at the University of Toronto. Aspiring to be an astronaut, observational astrophysicist, pilot, and archaeoastronomer, she has been one of the youngest researchers and observers at York University's Allan Carswell Observatory since 2019. Working alongside her coworkers from the observatory, there is a paper in the works entitled Dark Matter Annihilation at the Extended Halo. I will definitely look for that on the archive, Katerina. But without further ado, please join us in welcoming Katerina for an excellent talk. Thanks.
Thanks, Stephanie. Let me know if you can't hear me very well because I'm using my AirPods as a mic, so the quality might be a little bit skewed. So if not, totally good. So I'd like to thank everyone who has made it to this year's who has made this year's symposium possible, and it is an absolute honor, per usual, to be able to speak for you this evening. Today, I would like to shed light on some very cool projects of my coworkers and myself at the observatory, such as the mastermind behind HogCam, June Parsons, who is actually here with us this evening as an attendee. So thank you for joining us, June. He is the mastermind behind the low-cost space camera that uses Raspberry Pi to observe, as well as Dorado, an open source Python package that can replace modern research data processing. He will also be shown how to do astrophotography at home, imaging and analysis, as well as looking at a very popular imaging marathon that my observatory team had the luxury of doing in 2020, the Messier Marathon. So you will see many observatory photos throughout the presentation taken by observatory team members, including June Parsons himself and Sana Withers. Finally, since I've been asked many times throughout the year about amateur telescopes, binoculars, and what models and makes are best for certain groups of people and anticipated observing methods, I have compiled a list of exactly that, and I will be answering questions at the end solely to ensure that everything runs smoothly this evening. So before we begin, I wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. All right, so a bit about what I'll be talking about today: the mechanics of the 1 meter telescope located at Allan Carswell Observatory, the Messier Marathon, which I previously spoke on, phone imaging and analysis, research projects underway, such as HogCam and Dorado, telescope specs and what to look for if you're an amateur astronomer or a professional astronomer. And I will, without further ado, begin with the mechanics of the 1 meter telescope. So this here is the pride and joy of the observatory, the 1 meter telescope. So Allan Carswell has donated $500,000 in the construction of the 1 meter telescope. So it was matched by him for another $500,000 for a total of $1 million. So Allan Carswell has 2 domes that are used to house telescopes. Originally, one of the domes housed a very old 40 centimeter Meade LX200B telescope made in the 1990s, and the other still houses a 60 centimeter Cassegrain telescope installed in 1968. So in 2019, there was an installation of the 1 meter, which required a crane because of its sheer size, which cost about $1 million to construct. As I said, the telescope weighs two tons, having needed a crane to install each individual piece in the dome, as you see on the top left image. I myself am about 110 pounds, just for reference, and I am freely able to move this telescope about its axes, both vertically and horizontally, at will, with my bare hands. Now, this is not due to my sheer super strength. I have none of that, however, but due to a very strong pivot at the base. Now, of course, this is not the optimal way to move the telescope, even though we have programmed an Xbox controller to move the telescope fractions of a degree across the sky using the joysticks. So of course, there is a mechanical way to do so directly from our software, which we have entitled the Milky Way. Using this software, we can control any and all movements the telescope makes, opening the shutters to allow light inside, controlling the CCD camera, also called the charged coupling device, taking images using exposures or frequency of photos that can be manually set by the observer. So say that you want to take a certain number of images per second. This information will be sent to the telescope to perform that exact command. So telescope names like the 1 meter are defined by their primary mirror diameter length, and the bigger the diameter, the more light it will be able to collect, kind of like a bucket. So light will hit the primary mirror located in the bucket looking portion of the telescope. It will bounce off that mirror onto a secondary mirror, and the secondary mirror focuses the light into the tube located at the center console. So the tube is where the light data is collected. It can be distributed to either one of the 2 ports of the telescope. So ports are opened and closed using our software. So one port is for tour nights and public viewing. So we've made it accessible to all who want to look through the eyepiece of the telescope. So all that we need to do is just attach an eyepiece to the telescope and people can freely look into it. So the next port that we have is the CCD camera, which is how we take images, and we throw them up on our computer for data collection and analysis for later use. So taking images through telescope eyepieces is arguably just as difficult as taking pictures through a microscope lens. I don't know if you've ever had experience with it. I sure have. It is extremely difficult. So another cool thing that the 1 meter can do is the manufacturers allowed for an autofocus program that allows the telescope to automatically adjust the clarity of the image for optimal viewing and data collection. So the other port hosts our CCD camera again, which help us formulate these data sets. And I will talk about this shortly. So next we have the Messier Marathon. So just a bit of background on what the Messier Marathon is. In 1781, astronomer Charles Messier published a list of 110 astronomical objects called the Messier list. Nebulae, galaxies, and star clusters are among the most magnificent things in the night sky and are included on the list. Now, the irony is that this list was originally produced as a list of objects not to look at. So Messier was particularly interested in comets, and before light pollution and modern telescopes, all of these celestial phenomena appeared as weak, diffuse objects in the night sky and hindered his ability to look at these comets. So Messier kept directing his telescope at these objects and discovered things that weren't quite comets. So he resolved to categorize them so he wouldn't point his telescope at them again. And so sparked the inception of the Messier Marathon, which was more of a hobby for a group of 3 friends more than anything. We have Tom Hoffelder, Donald McColl's, and I believe it was Tom Wieland in the mid 1970s. So Messier was from a northern latitude, so all of these objects are tailored towards northern skies. And so imaging the Messier objects from the southern hemisphere is basically impossible. So to put an at-home twist to observing many of these objects, a good number of them can be seen either with the naked eye or a pair of binoculars. The highest number of Messier objects can be captured in a very small window from mid-March to early April. However, they can be observed around the autumnal equinox. Because our group anticipated a school closure due to COVID, they opted to run the marathon on the finest weekend possible with the clearest possible skies. Time must be budgeted accordingly because these objects in the sky only appear for a certain amount of time before attention must be turned to other objects. Okay, so now we have the imaging, the actual imaging of these images that we take at the observatory. So upon initial imaging, calibration frames were required to reduce noise in the background of the image. The most common calibration frames, also called support frames, include flat frames and bias frames. So I will go through these images in further depth when we discuss the process of astrophotography and the importance of these frames. As I said, objects in the sky tend to move across the sky faster than we can keep track of it usually. So images were kept in black and white for the most part to save time. So alongside the imaging, we needed to keep track of which objects we looked at and what time. The 1 meter telescope is so intelligent that we can simply choose an object on a map of the entire sky below the zenith, which was uploaded to Milky Way and updates itself in real time, and the telescope will navigate towards it automatically so long as the object we are trying to observe is above the zenith or the horizon line. While Messier photographs took up a lot of our time, we did some other imaging. So we took a number of pictures of the moon in order to create a composite image, which I'll go through more in depth later. And we also took pictures of Venus, Jupiter, and Uranus. So one of the raw photographs we got of the Sombrero galaxy, or Messier 51, is on the left, while Venus is located in the middle. The team took almost 1,000 photos throughout the course of the night, capturing 89 of these 110 objects. So we did not image during Messier season. So some of the last few objects were lost to us since they were too low on the horizon at sunrise or sunset. So even so, from start to finish, an almost entire Messier Marathon was performed in roughly 14 hours. The processing of these images was a different matter altogether, and it took far longer than the imaging itself. So the photographs were assigned to, were broken up and assigned to each individual observer at the time to process and analyze these images. So Sana, our coworker, processed some of the final images, which can be seen on your screen. So we've talked a lot about astrophotography and night sky imaging with the telescope and charged coupling device, but since we weren't able to use the observatory for the majority of the summer in 2020, we collectively decided to try a different sort of night sky imaging with one's phone. So while it may seem unlikely, a CCD or high-end camera isn't the only means to capture the night sky. The night mode on most newer smartphone cameras may image stars and even some deep sky objects. So check to see if your phone has a night mode if you want to try taking any of these photos yourself. Pictured here is a photo taken of the Orion Nebula through the 1-meter eyepiece. When the camera detects a low light environment, night mode kicks in automatically. So when the function is engaged, the night mode icon at the top of your screen turns yellow. Now, your phone's night mode snapshot may take a few seconds or many minutes, depending on how dark the environment is. Now, your exposures can also be changed using the scale at the bottom of your screen. So to maximize stability and control over exposure clarity, try setting your phone on a sturdy and secure surface or use a tripod. So if your phone detects movement while trying to take a photo with iOS 14 or later, you can align the crosshairs in the frame to help minimize motion and enhance image quality. So if there is no detail visible, try dragging the finger downward after locking focus to make the image a bit darker. Okay, so now if your photo is compatible, if your phone is compatible rather, all you need to take night mode images with lots of stars is just a clear dark sky and a stable mount for your phone or camera. Now, unfortunately, I have not found any method of imaging on an Android without the help of an application. So applications you can use are Camera V5 and Pro Camera, which allow you to raise the shutter speed, ISO, and light in order to brighten the image. To catch the true illumination of the night sky, turn off the flash. That is extremely important. Imaging works best when it's set flat on a table with the camera facing up. This way you can capture a large portion of the sky in a single image with minimal interference from neighboring buildings, since I don't always have the luxury of being in a rural environment. In terms of location, you don't necessarily need a really, really dark sky. And by that, I mean zero light pollution, but any skies just outside of a large metropolitan core will suffice. So note, however, that the further out into the countryside you go, the better your photos will be, naturally. The Milky Way's band can be seen reaching across the sky in the photographs below. Because the photograph on the right was taken in a rural location of central Ontario, the Milky Way is more visible. So here's a photo with two deep sky objects. The Andromeda galaxy is the faint oval smudge in the center, while the double cluster in Perseus is to the lower left. Now, the image on the left is the original, so it's unaltered, while the one on the right is the edited version. This was edited using the built-in photo editing tools on an iPhone, but you may be able to get better results with other third-party applications or computer programs. So using constellation limits and forms as a reference is a simple approach to identify objects in the night sky. Stars in the constellation Cassiopeia, whose stars form a W shape, were used to best position the camera for those exact objects in the photographs you see. Now that you've seen some observatory photos, I'll explain how they're made, which is a lot more complex than you might expect. So one must first take the image and then process those images, which can take a very, very long time. Now, the majority of the astronomical images you encounter, including those in this presentation, those from space telescopes, have been significantly modified from its original image. Now, they merge numerous long exposure photographs of a single item into a single image with more information than the individual images. So today I'll be using the example of NGC 7331, often referred to as the Deerlick group. So I'll show you how these photos are generated. This image was captured with our 1 meter and our CCD camera, which is a highly sensitive astronomical imaging sensor. As previously mentioned, we need to capture a variety of photos, beginning with the calibration frames, which correct any anomalies in the optical system. So first, a bias image, as seen in the top right, is a photograph of what the camera perceives to be nothing. So it's a 0-second exposure, which means the camera isn't yet exposed to any light and hence shouldn't be receiving any signal, yet it does. The bias frames capture the signal, which appears in all shots, and then it's used to adjust for it in your images. Now, the second calibration image is a flat field image seen on the bottom right. So flat field photos depict what the camera sees when it looks at a uniformly light object. So while this should result in an image that is fully uniform or flat with no changes in brightness across the entire frame, it does not. So rather, certain areas will be darker than others generally. This could be due to sensor dust, as shown in the bottom center of the flat field on the screen. Now, or it could be just due to the telescope discrepancies. So flat frames are utilized to eliminate these discrepancies from your images. So though people often deem these unnecessary, they make a huge difference in the final processed image. It is practically impossible without them. So the last kind of image you want to take are your light frames. So the images of your object. While imaging dim objects like the Deerlick group, these images will have long exposure times of normally a minute or more, which is quite a bit. You take long exposure images since the longer your exposures, the more light the camera receives from the object and the more detail your image will have. So unlike your cell phone camera or DSLR, the CCD at the observatory can only detect one color. So to produce color images, you need to image the object through different filters. So we use red, green, and blue filters, and a single image through each filter is shown on the screen. So if you were to image with a DSLR camera, you would not need to take images through different filters. So when imaging, you would want to take as many pictures through each filter as possible. So since the more light you can get from an object, the more detail your final picture will have. So for this example in particular, about 25 long exposure images were taken through each filter. Okay, so now we have the processing step. So after you have taken your data, now you need to process it to combine all of the individual pictures into one final image. So processing images has many steps, each of which will reveal more details in your image. So the first step in processing images is to calibrate each of your light images, which involves the usage of the flat and bias images to correct for any noise or abnormalities. So this process also involves removing any oddly exposed pixels from the image. So the image on the left of the screen shows a raw image that has not been calibrated or processed at all. The right shows a calibrated image. So this image has a lot more detail than the left. So the calibration alone does a lot to improve the image quality. So the next step is to align the images. So due to the Earth's rotation, stars appear to move through the sky during the night, clearly, and this will mean these stars will move across the field in the images. Now, many telescopes, including the 1 meter, will track stars, so it will move with the object during observations so that the star stays in the same place in every image. However, this tracking is not perfect, and stars will often drift slightly throughout the field. Star alignment will move the images to make sure the stars stay in the same place in every image, allowing them to be stacked. Now, what is stacking? What is this process of stacking? So following the alignment and calibration, we combine all of the images in a given filter into one image. When you combine red, green, and blue filters, you get 3 stacked photos, one with red, green, and blue. Now, the average signal across each pixel from all of the single photos is used to construct them, and it exposes more details than the individual calibrated frames. So the more images you have, the clearer your final picture will be. So more of the primary galaxy can now be seen in the center, while the minor galaxies to its right are more defined than before. So these quote unquote master photos, which is what we call them, will be employed to generate a color image at the end. So the master red image is on the left, and it is the same one that was displayed on the previous slide, but there are a few problems with it, such as the edges being brighter than the center. So this is due to what is found beyond the scope of the main object you are imaging, which is noise generated during image stacking. So you don't want that in your final image. You need to eliminate it using a technique known as background subtraction. Background subtraction is also used to in film when one isolates the moving parts of a scene by segmenting it into background and foreground. With regular image processing, it focuses on the main image at hand and sends everything else into an unfocused stance. So the master red image has had its background removed in the image on the right, and you can see more of the galaxy than before. Okay, so now that you've corrected the background, you'll join the red, green, and blue master images to create a colored image. Now, after combining these elements, you'll need to remove the background yet again a second time, as shown in the center image. So the reddish color in the middle of the image gets eliminated after the second removal. However, I know astrophotographers are picky, so this image is not as visually appealing as it can be. So what can we do to fix that? There is a green tint to the galaxy, and most of the stars and planets have a gold tinge. So to resolve this issue, the color must be changed to remove it. Now, now this is also used to make the stars more white in color, because that's generally the more acceptable looking color in photos. Now, the ultimate product of these processes can be seen in the image on the far right. Now, I'm unsure as to how many people know of this fact, but observatories and image processing centers, from as big as Hubble to the Allan Carswell Observatory, colors of final images are wholly false. So why is that? When one has a data set or a stack of images, it is up to the individual to process the image using filters I've mentioned previously. So amount of filter usage, contrast, other aspects of imaging will always differ person to person. Personally, that's what I find to be the most beautiful aspect of astrophotography, is that, like, other than heeding the final results, this is what I find to be the most beautiful part. Each picture ever processed is unique, even if it is derived from the exact same data set, and no one has ever made an image identical to yours. Now, the last phase, which I promise is the last phase, is to remove noise such as grain. So any other unwanted features from the image, this is kind of refining it. Intensity transformations are used to modify the image's color and brightness again, and several examples of such transformations are displayed on the screen. So this is similar to a contrast tool on your phone, in that it alters the image's intensity profiles to reveal more details. So, and it can be used on all colors. In the image are just a few. The blue channel is somewhat enhanced in this case to give the galaxy additional color. Intensity modifications can be used to add artificial color to photos, as I previously said, but they can also be used for other things. When you use intensity transformations, you will get an image with a dark background, but a lot of detail from your object. Voila, after all of that, you have the final image that has been processed. While this is the overall procedure for processing astrophotos, the subtleties differ depending on whether you're using a multicolor or filter-equipped camera. Excuse me. There are many more processing techniques available to enhance details in photographs, but this is the main procedure that will be applied while editing astrophotos. While most of the steps in this process are scientific, requiring precise parameters to yield quality results, the final step with the intensity modifications is more subjective, so it allows processed astrophotos to look different even when generated from the same data set. So this is an example of processing astrophotos with the same data set. So lovely June, who is in our call right now, has located the Crab Nebula with Sana, and they processed the Crab Nebula separately, entirely separately, and these are the results. So the one on the left is June's and the one on the right is Sana's. So notice the intense differences in color, which is ultimately the process that I spoke with you about that varies person to person. Okay, now to go full swing back to research currently underway at the observatory, there is one that stands out more so than other projects, in my opinion. So one of our senior researchers, June Parsons, came up with the amazing idea to make a low-cost space camera. So the HogCam project is named after Helen Sawyer Hogg, who is an influential and pioneering Canadian-American astronomer. She is known for her research in globular clusters and variable stars, as well as her long career of sharing astronomy with the public and science advocacy work, including encouraging women to pursue science. Now, the HogCam project aims to build a low-cost, versatile, and open astronomy camera based around the Raspberry Pi hardware ecosystem. So the current prototype has a 3D printed casing, which houses a Raspberry Pi 8 gigs, heatsink, and a small fan for airflow. Mounted to the case are standoffs holding a camera driver board, which features a Sony IMX image sensor. Currently, the standoffs provide a thermal gap between the image sensor and the main Raspberry Pi board to reduce thermal noise. Once the software of the system matures, a final design will be made which retains this gap, but further houses the image sensor. So it will streamline the body design and provide more airflow to the main board. What you are seeing here is some sample code right over here. And what the camera sees when uploaded to a computer. So speaking of the main board, any current generation 4 or high-end generation 3 Raspberry Pi board should be able to drive HogCam with ease. So to make prototyping legroom easier, the top tier $100 Pi board was chosen. So given the backwards compatibility of the Raspberry Pi ecosystem and proven track record of long-time hardware support in this backward compatibility from the Raspberry Pi Foundation and Friends, there is the potential that future image sensors can be integrated into the HogCam project. So for those interested in the specs of HogCam, there are the many particulars. So in Canada, the Raspberry Pi camera board retails for $69 and is slated to remain in production until at least 2027, according to the Raspberry Pi Foundation. So the HogCam supports the installation of CS thread mount lenses and can be attached to any telescope via a CS thread to 1.25-inch adapters. Now, the sensor has a 7.9 millimeter diagonal pixel array, which shoots 12-bit raw format. The sensor is a one-shot RGB color, so it is not suitable for narrowband astrophotography. There is a built-in IR cut filter, which can be irreversibly removed by the user. With the raw cost of the system coming well under $200, this brings a much-needed low-cost option to an otherwise prohibitively expensive field. So given that the Pi itself has onboard wireless communication, storage, and processing capabilities, the ability to control telescope hardware from HogCam has been demonstrated. This has so far utilized the INDI astronomy hardware protocol, but ASCOM and proprietary systems should be possible as well. Now, the HogCam can be battery powered via a lithium portable phone battery bank and be remotely controlled via network. So far, SSH and Astroberry-based control tests have been performed to the system, so the Pi brain provides the unique ability to auto-calibrate and stack images before they ever make it to your main computer. So in theory, the rapid imaging capability of the IMX sensor should allow for high fidelity telescope live streaming for public outreach, providing yet another avenue for HogCam to bring astronomy to the public. So recently, Raspberry Pi made an upgrade from the old MMAL, or multimedia abstraction layer, and versatile driver system known as libcamera, and also the switch to 54-bit operating systems. HogCam will make the move to these new systems, and the new capabilities will be explored. The observatory is looking forward to what else can be done with it. Now, again, what you are seeing here is the result of HogCam's work. The recent eclipse was captured, and the resolution was honestly higher than June anticipated, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the original file that he downloaded was 800 megabytes. That was obviously compressed for distribution purposes. So another set of images you are looking at is Jupiter and Saturn and a processed image of Polaris. Now, the second research project that is currently underway from June himself is Dorado. Dorado, or Digitized Observatory Resources for Automated Data Operations, is an open source Python package originally made to replace IRAF. This is Imaging Reduction and Analysis Facility from the NOAO, or National Optical Astronomy Observatory, in research data processing and analysis at the Allan Carswell Observatory. So the project was widened to accommodate the public outreach astrophotography efforts at the observatory, and then later widened again to support all current observatory projects and at-home astrophotography hobbyists, including those working with HogCam, while remaining open to future ideas and data sources such as the Honeycomb Space Telescope, JWST, Hubble, SDSS, CFHT and CADC, TESS, and much more. So Dorado currently can't compete with expensive imaging programs like Photoshop and PixInsight, whatever, in advanced astro imaging processing, though this will hopefully change as Dorado matures, obviously. But Dorado gives you more freedom over your data, does not use proprietary film formats or file formats like .xisf, and most importantly, it is free. So while Dorado has been in development for 4 years now and has already been used in one published paper and at least one more in writing, am I right, June? Dorado is just now being unveiled to the public in a stable form. So we believe that Dorado can become a bridge between professional astronomers and those just getting started. Here you can see a colored image, totally done by Dorado, all of the Crab Nebula. So to the right, here is the light curve that was automatically plotted by the Python data. Now, an important question I got last year that I don't think I was able to respond to in full because I didn't have enough information at the time. We have a mixed bag of people here, both professional and amateur. So I thought I would provide some details about telescope specs that would be suitable for both experts and non-academic researchers. I want to first delve into the specs suitable for professional research. So first and foremost, a solid telescope requires a large aperture. You can be sure that the telescope will have greater light gathering power and will be able to see deep sky objects as well as various planetary objects that surround us if you do it this way. So more serious, intermediate, and advanced hobbyist telescopes range from 120 millimeters to about 355, I believe. So the next thing you should be looking for is a very good up-to-date optical system. So this provides a much higher light transmittance and to protect your eyesight from the damages that observing extremely bright celestial objects can cause. The last thing to look out for is a tracking system. So much like the 1 meter at the observatory, the built-in GPS receivers help us locate objects and stay on target for as long as we need it to. Some examples of telescopes with these features that you should consider looking into are the Orion 9738 Skyview Pro 8-inch and the UHTC Coding, which are respectively the best reflector telescope and Meade telescope on the market currently. Okay. Next, we have the specs that are not necessary but preferred for amateur astronomers. So for everyday backyard use, as previously stated, raising aperture enhances the projection of deep sky objects, making them appear brighter and more detailed. Most nebulae and galaxies are tiny diffuse specks when viewed through narrow apertures. So objects with aperture openings of roughly 20 centimeters already reveal structures, and structured objects such as the moon and planets have far greater surface detail than anything else, really. Another very important aspect of telescopes that is often overlooked when amateur astronomers seek a telescope to call their own is an appropriate telescope mount. So these can differ based on what you'd like the mount to do. So the best telescope mount is determined by the telescope's dimensions and objects, as well as the telescope's major focus. So that pun was very much unintended, sorry. An appropriate mount is the German equatorial mount, as it is frequently the most desired in astrophotography setups. And because it is aligned with the Earth axes, it is simple to track the movement of a celestial object by rotating around only one axis. So the SkyQuest XT8 has a very stable mount, and it is easily maneuverable and comes with several magnifications for eyepieces. As a young researcher involved in really cool investigations pertaining to astronomy, I am anticipating good things to come for the observatory for many years when Dorado and Hogham take off. I said when, not if. They will truly revolutionize the field of astrophotography and how we capture images for public distribution. I can argue all day that private collections in astronomy should not exist because everyone, even those beyond the scope of academics, are equally as enthralled by the workings of the universe. Accessibility to listen in on these talks and outreach events are of the utmost importance, which is why I personally want to thank our lovely crew and all who have come to talk to us about what they are passionate about. I want to personally thank Ryan and Jay for putting this together, June for letting me use your data. I hope I've done it justice, Stephanie for your wonderful moderating, Julie for keeping us in check as a good boss does, Janine for immaculate graphics per usual, Adam for his unmatched advertising skills, Ava for your much needed support in organization and meeting minutes, and last but most certainly not least, Caleb for the amazing website. Thank you to all of you for showing your support, and we will be seeing you tomorrow for more events planned.
Okay, if we can open up to questions. I have a few. Okay, so let's see, first question. Does subjective coloring of photos affect the scientific results if the photo is used for research?
Does the subjective coloring of photos affect the scientific results? In terms of the subjective coloring of photos, not particularly. I don't think it really makes that much of a difference because ultimately when you deal with the subjective coloring, it's just color. I don't think it really has anything to do with the research of the image itself, though what we do collect initially when we analyze that initial image, we can already notice some things and we can already make those assumptions based on what we see. And then when we add more images on top of to the original one, it just kind of builds that understanding and tend to come to the same conclusion even with different colored images. So it really doesn't make a difference.
Okay, next question. Is there a way to use your phone camera in conjunction with a telescope?
I certainly think that's possible. Yeah. Now 8-inch telescope is what I am assuming that is what it says. So it is possible. Now some telescopes, especially amateur telescopes, do not have this option. But if you're looking into more slightly higher end telescopes, like the ones that I showed you previously, most of these telescopes do have that option. Now, normally this differs based on the telescope itself, but it's usually pretty straightforward. But if you do not have either like a Raspberry Pi board, like what June did with a Hogham, then it's not really all that possible unless you have these external software devices attached to your phone.
How can astrophotography help an astronomer or astrophysicist, if at all?
This is a pretty broad question. Quite good though, because I can play around with this question a bit. Now, I think that astronomy is obviously a really broad topic, and astrophotography in itself is also very broad. So I think it's just a matter of, it helps you specialize, I guess, in what you want to look into more particularly with your field. So for me personally, I found that with just observing my crew at the observatory work through image processing of, say, variable stars, when I first started out, that's kind of what I wanted to do, just because it looked cool. And the way that June explained it to me that first time was definitely stuck with me. So it really kind of narrowed my search down into what I wanted to specialize in, particularly with astrophysics. So astronomy and astrophotography is also, I don't know, there's just something about it that really just draws you in, even if you're not, you know, of that kind of a field, like you said, astronomy and astrophysics. But I think that just helps you find who you are as an individual. You get to learn more about yourself in the process and how you can deal with data. It really, I guess it just turns you into a more well-rounded individual, in my opinion, because you're dealing with sensitive data and at the same time you get to have fun with it. So I guess that's how it's changed me as an individual and what I do with my research.
And the last listed question is, what coding languages would be best suited for working with Raspberry Pi?
Python. Python is wonderful. I know that at U of T, you get started with Python in Foundations of Physics 1 and 2. I do highly suggest, however, if you do want to look more into it, there is a free coding website. I used it a while ago when I was still learning it, and I don't remember what it's called, but it is basically totally open source. You get to play around with your own code, and you get taught how to make code and use it for applied instances such as astrophotography. Again, I forget what it's called now, but I'm sure if you look something like that up, you will be able to find it, and it is totally easy to access. So Python is definitely necessary if you go into astronomy, especially now, because most of the stuff that astronomers do currently is digital. So it is a good idea to learn it before you go off to do your graduate studies, to kind of have on your resume to show them that, hey, like I can do this too, I can do these big projects. And it gives you more leeway when you apply for research projects, because, for example, SURP, so summer undergraduate research programs, or projects rather, for University of Toronto undergrads, 9 out of 10 times those are coding research projects. So you may want to really push yourself to get into that before focusing on really anything else.
Okay, let's see. Okay, Ryan has a question. For astrophotography, does the mindset of buy a cheap one now to see if you like, and once it breaks, buy a better one later apply for telescopes? You are muted, by the way.
Oh, thanks. So that's a wonderful question, Ryan. Personally, I think I had my first telescope when I was like 10 years old, and I still haven't gotten rid of it. Now, I guess that's a little bit of a problem because my at-home astrophotography is not as high-end as I would like it to be. So if you're really pressed for money and you do not want to spend it, I still kind of suggest that you spend it, or at least increase your budget by a little bit. At the same time, you can buy a lower end telescope and possibly add to it. But if you're looking for something long-term, you may want to invest money into a decent telescope, because If you're going to be dealing with, deep sky objects, you obviously don't want a really small lens. You want something that is a little bit bigger with those features that I told you about, like the large aperture, a really good mount, and easy accessibility. You kind of want that. So Ryan, if you're thinking of buying a telescope that is high end, but you are insistent that you are frugal, get rid of that mindset, because just like, I don't know, advertising for YouTube as an example, you can't, get more subscribers if you do not, kind of put your time and your money into it. So you really have to be passionate about what you're doing, and it shows usually through your equipment. Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Wang also has another question.
Okay.
Unfortunately, for a struggling AST 326 student, what operations are used when correcting with the flat and bias fields?
Wait, what was the question again?
That's a great question.
I got something in the chat. Sorry, I got kind of distracted. Where is it? What operations are used when correcting the flat and bias fields? So we can go back to that. Where is it? Just gonna look for it. Okay. So when you talk about operations, and feel free to unmute yourself, Ryan, because I'm kind of having a little bit of trouble understanding what it is exactly you're trying to ask. So when you're talking about flat frames or support frames as a whole, it's just a matter of, see, when I first started out at the observatory, I didn't think that flat fields or biases would be that important, because they're obviously, they look like nothing. like you're not really seeing anything really except for dust. So I don't know. I guess it's just more important than what people may imagine them to be. But again, I'm still having some trouble understanding what it is you're exactly trying to ask. Like, do you mean, like, when you talk about operations when using the flat and bias, are you just talking about how it's done? Oh, you say subtracting or dividing. Yeah, basically. So when you essentially just apply the flat or you just apply the bias, it kind of automatically fixes the individual pixels that you have in your image. So again, they're extremely important, and it is a type of subtraction of the background, because again, it does make your image that much more clear. I don't know if they spoke about that much in, what is it, AST 326, but when you are imaging, obviously taking your flats and biases, again, often overlooked, is extremely important. So if you want any more clarification on that, please let me know. And we can have a one-on-one about that if you need any help with anything in particular. And yeah, I have another question. Do you want me to just read it, Jay? I would assume so. What are some of the best observation spots in Southern Ontario? Southern Ontario, that's a really difficult question as well. So when the observatory team and myself went out to observe the eclipse that happened a few months ago, we went to Harbourfront, and Harbourfront during the early morning. So this was right before sunset when we had to take the images. There aren't a lot of good places in Southern Ontario, really. Like, if you're talking about Southern, we're talking about like Toronto and near the lake. I don't think there really are many, if at all, unless you go to like a forest or something and you set up in a clearing where there aren't any building obstructions. Now, the further north you go, the more, the better your images will turn out. Obviously because of light pollution, and light pollution does travel and it does get annoying in Southern Ontario, which is why I kind of find it really difficult to do at-home photography because I live in a building and surrounded by other buildings, and my balcony doesn't really go up, so I can't really set down my phone on anything flat close to me. So I have to travel usually 50 minutes to an hour and a half of transit north to the observatory to get any kind of good footage. So try to be mindful in that. If you want to do a really good observing session, give yourself some time to travel a little bit further north and your results will be much better, I promise. I think that's all.
All right. Do we have any last questions for our speaker here? If not, then thank you very much, Katerina, for this wonderful talk. It's great to
My
have you.
pleasure. Thank you. It's always a pleasure talking for ASX.